What is an internet shutdown? It's simple. It's when modern society stops working at full capacity. Computers, phones, and all the basic technology that people rely on are rendered useless when the government decides to hit the kill switch. India has experienced more shutdowns than any other country in the world. While shutdowns impact day-to-day life and businesses in India, the impact on constitutional rights of citizens and the ability of human rights defenders to protect those rights is far more severe than many think. This series of videos examines these impacts in order to understand the true and staggering cost of internet shutdowns, particularly for human rights and its defenders. India leads the world in internet shutdowns, responsible for 70% of the shutdowns worldwide. While many of them are for short periods of time, the Indian government once shut down the internet in Kashmir for over 200 days. Based on this growing trend, the use of shutdowns could increase in the years to come. In many cases, the justification used by the government for a shutdown is that it's necessary to ensure national security. Yet serious allegations suggest that shutdowns have been used as a tool to stop citizens from protesting or demanding their rights. The impact of this kind of shutdown on human rights defenders has been severe, and often rendered them powerless to do their jobs of journalism, law, or activism. The impact of internet shutdowns on human rights is stark. They've turned into a tool that the government can use to silence dissent. Lawyers and journalists have been dramatically impacted by these increasingly frequent shutdowns. Without the internet, lawyers can't properly research case law, and in many cases were deprived of the ability to speak with or even locate their clients. That could turn an internet shutdown into an attack on a defendant's right to fair trial. In some instances, judges couldn't even access court data systems, and journalists were deprived of the digital tools needed to report on human rights abuses taking place during the shutdowns, which meant countless stories died with the victims. On August 5, 2019, everyone in Jammu and Kashmir woke up to a complete communication blackout. Phones stopped working, mobile and broadband internet were shut down, and the postal service and cable TV channels were cut off, all with no indication of when they would return. A strict curfew was enacted, enforced by security and police laying down barbed wire and roadblocks. Why cast the region into an information black hole? The government claimed it was necessary to maintain law and order because the Indian parliament was about to revoke the region's autonomous status. But critics asserted the shutdown happened so that Kashmiris couldn't get news from the outside world, and to prevent them from telling their stories. In this situation, parts of the government decided democracy was going to work best if it operated in the dark. During Kashmir's 2019 internet shutdown and curfew, people were unable to move freely throughout the region. This created an impossible situation for human rights defenders, especially journalists, who were unable to do the basic function of their jobs: gather information and hold Indian authorities accountable for what they do and say. The only source of news in Kashmir became the government itself, which allowed it to control what information the public received through press conferences and daily releases of information bulletins. That means instead of reporting it, journalists find themselves waiting to hear what the government has decided counts as the news. Ultimately, this means countless stories and human rights abuses go unreported and are likely lost forever. Growing up as a Kashmiri, one gets used to security checkpoints, but the summer of 2019 was different. Beginning on August 5th, 2019, navigating the security forces and barbed wire turned a 15-minute walk to the press club into an hours-long odyssey. During one of the most significant developments in Kashmir's history, the region's journalists were left questioning whether they could even report on the Indian Parliament's decision to revoke Kashmir's autonomous status when the only source of information they had was the government itself. The day after this incredibly consequential development, only 4 of the 55 daily newspapers in Kashmir were able to go to print. This massive story was being reduced to a whisper, with the people of Kashmir being kept in the dark.
A week ago, the internet was shut down in Kashmir and the outside world went quiet. Now we line up and wait for our turn to tell our stories. As a journalist, we must enter a media facilitation center set up by the local government. We sign in on a register, show our IDs, and work under the watchful eyes of security officials. There are only 4 computers, 1 phone, and erratic internet access. Erratic internet sadly being a relative improvement over no internet. It was not a question of if we were being watched, but in how many ways our actions were monitored. Our choice was either to do our job under these suffocating circumstances or not do our job at all, which is to say, we had no choice but to continue. Limited and surveilled, but not silent.
After the August 5th, 2019 internet shutdowns, many people incarcerated in Jammu and Kashmir jails were silently moved to facilities in other regions. In the case of Amir, a lawyer and activist, that meant his jailed family member essentially vanished. Amir's family spent months in anguish and feeling helpless during the lockdown and information blackout, trying to find their family member. Finally, it was only after Amir traveled to Delhi seeking leads on his relatives' whereabouts that he discovered that they were now being held in Uttar Pradesh. Amir's tireless effort meant his jailed family member and their story would not vanish into thin air. But how many other detainees could say the same? While Kashmir had India's longest, the use of internet shutdowns is not exclusive to Kashmir. Shutdowns across the rest of the country have been justified in a variety of ways, from stopping students from cheating on state exams to stopping protests that are critical of the government's policies. Shutdowns were imposed in major cities like Delhi in response to protests against the government's policies on citizenship and farming laws. While the government justified its actions under the guise of security, some criticized these shutdowns as a way for the government to quell protest and limit the rights of citizens to express themselves. An internet shutdown turns previously simple tasks into demonstrations of will and dedication for human rights defenders. Like when a Darjeeling journalist has no internet connection to submit their story, they must climb what's referred to as Geo Hill to catch a spotty connection from the neighboring state of Sikkim to send it. Or when a Srinagar journalist has to hitch a ride on a television broadcast van to send a recording of their laptop screen to have the story transcribed by the news desk in Delhi. Or when a medical student must take a train 20 miles away to wait in line hoping they can briefly get access to an internet-connected computer to check results of an important exam. These are the burdens everyday people bear when the government treats internet as a privilege, not a right.
As a journalist, writing the story is usually my biggest concern. And today, I've got my story ready. But without internet, the greatest challenge is sending it to my editor. The words on my laptop stare back at me, and I wonder, could their journey end here with no one ever able to read them? To avoid that fate, I load the article onto a pen drive, search desperately for a person flying to Delhi, give them the flash drive, ensure that they hand deliver it to a publisher, and hope nothing goes wrong in the process. What used to take a click now requires an odyssey. But the story lives, and not just on my laptop screen.
The impact of internet shutdowns in India cannot be understated. The work of human rights defenders has been challenged, dissenting voices have been silenced. And while the shutdown in Kashmir starting in August 2019 was the longest in the world's history, this is not a localized issue. States across India have utilized shutdowns with growing frequency. Some feel the instability and uncertainty created by these shutdowns is an intentional effort to turn the internet into a privilege that can be taken away at any time. There is fear that the continued use of jarring and debilitating internet shutdowns may actually work to normalize the practice, not discredit it. The more frequently it occurs, the less unprecedented and shocking it becomes. To stop sliding down this slippery slope, internet users must understand the impact before it's too late, and their elected officials make shutdowns a fixture of digital life across India.